Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we are going to be going over a spicy build today, which is kind of funny considering this is one of the most vanilla builds I've ever played. That is because I'm known in the community to make very weird and off-meta builds every so often, and that is mainly just because I like experimenting. And the last time I played a Racing Strike definitely was a very interesting and weird way of playing a racing strike. Now, that version of a racing strike was fun where you just kind of just held down the right click, but I talked about it in the video and it was definitely not the best way of playing a racing strike. And I think I cracked the nut. We have found the best way to play a racing strike where not only you don't have to worry about your mana, but you also get the big slam playstyle that a racing strike really wants you to do. And this is going to be crit big hit erasing strike VoidKnight with well over 80% movement speed. We're zooming through monoliths and we're also doing the biggest of crits. At least for the most part, we're doing like 2 to 3 million crits, which is like big enough for a racing strike's sake. Now, I will say that this build isn't like the best bosser ever. Due to the way that boss DR works and how it punishes builds like this, it's definitely not very fun for the most part on bosses. You can still do them. They do fine. You can kind of just, void cleave them, void cleave, erasing strike, void cleave, erasing strike, but it doesn't give you that satisfying gameplay like the old slam builds of old for Path of Exile, which is not necessarily what you should be aiming for, as, of course, that would be absurd, but it definitely feels like as though the system is stacked against one big hit build's favor, and in this case, it definitely hurts it a lot. Because sure, you're doing like 2 million crits on the dummy and all that, but those 2 million crits, it goes from like a 2 million crit to a 1 million crit to a 500k crit or whatever for boss CR, and it feels awful. But completely ignoring that, that's like only like 5% of your gameplay, by the way. The other 95% of your gameplay is absolutely balls to the wall, like big explosions with a racing strike, of course, with the explosions, big movement speed with the boots that I have, and all the movement speed you get from VoidKnight. I don't even have a source of haste. You can go way faster than this than I'm currently doing, right? And you also just don't have to worry about mana. That was the biggest problem with the older Racing Strike build, was mana was always a constant problem. Because of the way that I did the combo and the way that the build worked, it was always a problem with the big hit Erasing Strike. But thankfully, with the rework to Void Well, where you only need three, of course, void stacks, right? Void essence stacks. It means that you can stack those void essences with a racing strike, right? And end up with a bunch of extra mana for free. Now, there's a few ways that we go about doing this. The first things off, of course, we have the original hit with a racing strike. Then we have the forced echo that a racing strike has, the 60 mana one with that node inside of it. And we actually have base crit on our apathy's maw. Now, this is going to be weird, okay? Let me explain it a little bit. So, Void Cleave allows us to auto crit with our next erasing strike, right? Now that makes it so our next racing strike always auto crits. Now, why do we have base crit on our apathies? Well, the idea here is on a boss, right? Specifically, I will attack with a racing strike, and then that 45% chance to crit that we have currently for melee attacks, right? As long as we have, of course, anomaly up, right? For that 150% increase crit, it means most of the time we're going to get an extra void essence, because if you read the void essence note again, it says per erasing strike crit. So if the echo crits as well, you get an extra void essence, which means that this is enough to keep your mana completely tied up. And as long as you stack enough max mana, that means you never have to really think about mana ever again. Now, every so often on a boss, you might have to accidentally like wait a few seconds for enough mana to do like a free hit combo. So if you ever run out of void essences and run out of mana, simply just run around the boss room, wait for your mana to go back to like 100 and then continue. And at that point, you can simply like go back to attacking like you normally were. Because sometimes, let's be real, with RNG, it will cuck you sometimes. It will happen with everybody, right? But yeah, This has been a Racing Strike Crit. If you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as that's the best way of supporting me currently. And you can also check out my Twitch, which is the link down below. You can watch me live and ask me questions and stuff like that. And with all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go in game and talk about the build some more. Bye. All right, so here we are in game with the character. Let's just go over the skills. So for a racing strike here, the main thing, we take 1 point travel here, 2 points travel into Prophet's Onslaught, then 3 points into Essence of the End. This makes it so we can generate Void Essences on crit with any erasing strike hit, and that enables, of course, Void Well, which is very strong. That enables this entire build. Now we take 2 points travel into Merciful, 2 points into Erasure of the Living, 1 point travel into Time Loop, 1 point into Shattered Continuity. This makes it so that we don't have a cooldown on a Racing Strike. Then 2 points into Chamber of Fate for that massive 50% more damage. Then we take 3 points into Dust of the Wind. This area is cool, and the Void Rift area makes cleaning up trash very easy. Then 2 points travel into Rifts of Decay. Then 1 point into Final Hour. Now, I've been testing it more and more, and I think that it's probably not the best to try to go for Final Hour. It'd be better to take these points and put them into the rest of the more damage at the rest of the tree, like Merciful, Obliteration, Erasure of Living, and then like the crit multi. If you did that, you'd probably end up with more damage than I currently have, although your clear would be a little bit worse, but I think that's the case. Now, another thing as well, I'm currently using an Apathy's Maw. That's just because I had an Apathy's Maw sitting around. You can use a Void Beacon, which would make it so that you have access to Implements of Destruction for another 60% more damage. So Void Beacon would end up being significantly more damage, but a little bit less area. So it's like to each their own. I think Void Beacon is the superior version. I just didn't have an LP Void Beacon laying around, but I did have an LP Apathy Small laying around. So like I said, it's just to each their own in that regard. Now, of course, that's pretty much it for Erasing Strike. Also, as well, with Void Beacon, you'd have to scale actual crit, as you wouldn't be able to use Void Cleave, which we're going to talk about. 2 points traveled into the depths, 1 point into precognition, 1 point into Rift Maker, 3 points travel into Champion of the Void, then 1 point obliterator. This makes it so that we always critically strike with the next erasing strike, which makes this build viable, meaning we don't have to invest too hard into critical strike chance to make the build feel good. This makes now this is very important. This node and this node, it only applies to the next erasing strike. It does not apply to echoes. That is why we're not investing into echoes too hard. That's why we're not investing into the extra hit from time loop too hard. All we care about is the first initial hit, and everything else after that is just icing on the cake. And being able to dump nodes like all the echo nodes means we can grab all the movement speed, the HP, and grab other nodes in the trees as well, and completely makes it so that we can grab a bunch of different nodes instead of having to focus into all that, because our echoes aren't doing our damage. Our big hit is doing the damage, which is cool. Now we take 3 points travel and we'll 3 points into Dark Pathway for the cooldown. The lower you get Void Cleave's cooldown, the more damage you deal, because the more time you can spam Erasing Strike. 3 points into Fraying Strikes for some extra Void Shred. Resonating Cleave to make it so we Abyssal Echoes. Thankfully, Abyssal Echoing with Void Supremacy means the next Erasing Strike we do deals more damage against slowed enemies. It automates it for us. Another reason why we like Void Cleave over utilizing something like, of course, Void Bacon. And 5 points into Warp Decay for Time Rot. Time Rot, of course, matters for this build, not only for Final Hour, but for, of course, Food for the Worms, which is a bunch of more damage as well. But I do think, like I said, I would dump this entire node setup and then just build into more damage. If you want more damage, dump all this and then go into more stuff like the more damage here, the crit multi, and stuff like that. That would probably end up being better. And then you wouldn't have to pivot so hard into time rod generation. And that's pretty much it for Void Cleave. Now for Abyssal Echoes, this is a pretty simple tree. Mainly you care about Void Supremacy for the more damage after using it. And of course, we also get the Abyssal Rifts, Screaming Rifts. That makes it so that Abyssal Echoes sits there for a little bit and keeps applying Void Shreds, Armor Shred stacks. One of the most important things for a big hit build is applying armor shred stacks properly. We can't really like apply it with our attacks, but we can make Abyssal Echoes apply a bunch of armor shred stacks with increased effect, and that essentially works for us, essentially, right? And that's pretty much it for, of course, Abyssal Echoes. Then there is Reversal. Reversal, all we care about is the 60% increased damage taken here, right? We care about the massive, and I mean massive, like I think it's 48% more damage from Food for Worms for the most part, as long as we have a bunch of time rots, right? Which is really good. It's a lot of extra damage. We also turn off the cooldown so we can spam it, and of course, some extra attack speed to make our combo feel a bit better. Then now for Anomaly here, mainly this is your stereotypical buff anomaly tree, nothing too crazy. All we care about mainly is having the void bubble on top of us to give us a little bit of extra cooldown for our combo. As you can see, we get a little bit of cooldown, bringing void cleave down to 2 seconds, which is pretty good. And that's pretty much it for the skills. Now let's talk about, of course, the passives that are important. So, like I said, the most important passive is Void Well. Everything else is up to your taste. Movement speed's really strong. The HP is really strong. Using this node to like get our mana to a good spot is strong. I went for Rot Grip for even more time rot chance so we can get to 12 stacks easier with this setup. But like I said, if you end up dumping that, you might actually end up dumping these nodes. Then for the flat damage here, Melee Void, like Leech here, decent amount of Leech, right? Then the crit multi for free from Void Corruption, then 10 points of Abyssal Endurance for the HP and resistances, because resistances are always nice. And then I do grab Defiance for easy capping of my res, while also, of course, giving us Attunement, which gives us max mana. And then eventually you'd fill out Valor as you get more points. I think that's the best way to go about it. One thing you can do is you can go in the base tree here, put some more points, and grab Blade Master, which would give us a little bit of extra quality of life. And that's pretty much it for, of course, the passive tree. Now let's talk about items and stuff like that. Now, the only mandatory item to get this build started and running is Apathy's Maw. You don't even need melee crit on it. You don't need it at all. But the biggest problem with this build is getting to a high amount of max mana. So as you can tell right now, I am at 379 max mana. I am cutting it, to be honest. I am cutting it. Like really, I am cutting it to like the lowest amount of mana I possibly can get away with. This is like I wouldn't go less than this essentially, right? This is about like where it feels comfy. Because remember, with of course Void Well, we are set at 30% of our mana. So we're always working with 30% of our mana. And the better that we have, the more mana we have, like with like Future Mind or whatever, right? The better we'll be off. Now, the main places for stacking mana with this build is with our chest implicits, right? And then our helmet implicits. Now, however you go about getting your mana, it doesn't matter, but these are like the ways I went about getting my mana. You can get like plus levels to a racing strike for more damage on like a seal or whatever, or you can get like there's a lot of things you can do with the gear. The my gear is not finalized at all. This is just simply the setup that I managed to put together with the stash that I have currently. Now, other items that are nice to have, a Solarian Step, even without movement speed extra on it. Solarian Step just gives you a lot of extra free crit multi. It brings you up to like 400% crit multi, which is poggers. It's actually amazing. Then we also have Shattered Chains. Since we have Apathy's Mon, we're applying Doom with 100% chance to hit. We're applying it with Void Cleave, Erasing Strike, and our Abyssal Echoes, and our Volatile Reversal. We're getting that massive 15% more damage constantly. And this is just an overall good belt because not only does it give you a lot of increased armor, it also drops with LP pretty commonly, right? And it gives you a massive amount of increased damage. This is essentially like the best belt you could possibly get for this build. So it's definitely something you'd be looking into. And that's pretty much it for uniques for the build. Let's talk about the rest of the slots. So, like I said, the helmet, bunch of mana, and then HP. Amulet, you want just crit multi. That's all you care about. And then Void Pen eventually. Then HP, and then a res that you want or whatever. And of course, for the weapon slot, Apathy's Maw, you could try a Void Bacon, but the problem, like I said, with Void Bacon is it doesn't work with Void Cleave. So you do have to dump Void Cleave, and you have to manually cast your Abyssal Echoes, which means you have to actually use Embrace in Darkness and all that, which would cause a lot of complications for not only plus levels, it would also cause a lot of complications, like you'd have to actually cast Abyssal Echoes, which is a little annoying. This just kind of like automates it, which is nice, right? So that's just up to you if you want to use a Void Bacon. You'd have to change the build significantly. A friend of mine, Misha, actually plans on playing the Void Bacon version eventually. Now, for the ring here, just a res. I actually am just using it to crit cap avoid, right? Then silver ring here with HP, res, like no damage on it, whatever, right? Gloves here, just endurance, some HP, right? And strength. It's like not too crazy, right? And then for the relic here, it's just HP, some void damage, some res. Like I said, my gear is not the best at all. Like it's pretty bad. Like there's some really good pieces like Sorions and Shattered Chains, but then there's some really bad pieces like my relic. I my stash, I haven't been playing that much, so I'm getting to the limit of what I would say is possible for my stash to create in terms of builds. But to be honest, I actually like the fact that I played this with such bad gear, as it kind of shows you that like you don't necessarily need the best gear of all time to play a build like this. You also want to just grab some increased melee void damage. That's your best in slot idol, just a bunch of these, right? And then I just filled out the rest of it with resistances. And that's pretty much it for the character. And that's pretty much it for the build. Also as well for blessings, like I said, armor here, armor here. I actually don't even have flat armor here. Eventually, you'd want flat armor. And then crit avoid, right? Eventually, here it'd be a res, right? And then eventually, here crit multi. I just never hit crit multi while I was playing, so we're missing like 40% crit multi as well. And that's pretty much it for the character. That's pretty much it for the build. With all that being said, this has been Dread. You can squeeze out way more damage with this if you spent more time on it. Bye.